I'm seeing presence of a quorum, so I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Amherst School Committee at 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, February 8th. When I call your name, please state present for roll call. Mr. Harrington.
Harrington present.
Mr. Demling.
Demling present.
Ms. Shao.
Shao present.
Mr. Rhodes.
Rhodes present.
And McDonald present. So we will move on to our first item, which is approval of minutes. And we have two sets of minutes to approve tonight. We have January 11th and January 18th, which was that special additional meeting. So let's start first with the 11th. Mr. Demling?
On page 3, item C, starting with Demling noted it should be shared with the community that the Fort River K-5 only model it should be is being developed as a requirement, et cetera, because there was a push from stakeholders to review, not because there was a push from stakeholders to review a K-5 only model. I was just making the comment that, so adding the word only before the K-5 one.
Any other edits? So let's look, if it's okay, we'll just do them all together. So we'll look at the 18th now. Any edits? Seeing none, I'll move that we approve the minutes of January 11th, 2022 and January 18th, 2022 as amended.
Second.
I'll move by McDonald, second by Shao. We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Rhodes?
Rhodes, aye.
Ms. Shao?
Shao, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
And McDonald, aye. So the motion passes unanimously. Next up, we have public comment, and we have two. Both were sent in as written comments, and they were attached to the agenda packet. One of them was also sent in as a voice recording. It was longer than 3 minutes, so I will play the first 3 minutes of it, but just for folks in the meeting as well as listening at home, the full text of the comment is included in the agenda packet.
Dr. Angelica Bernal, Amherst, Massachusetts. I'm speaking on behalf of CPAC as the Vice President. CPAC strongly urges the school committee to consider how we should be designing for disability with the new educational building project. No group of students is more diverse than special education students. These young people have an extremely wide variety of needs and deserve to be fully accommodated. Legally, per the Individuals with Disability Act idea of 1990, special education students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. These important terms highlight our duty to accommodate each child's specific conditions. Designing for disability in classrooms is perhaps one of the most profound ways we can advise the building committee. Students with disabilities have just as much right to a quality educational experience as other students. When all students have a comfortable and supportive space to learn in, they go on to live happier, healthier lives outside of school. When students with disabilities can access every area of campus that their peers have access to, it builds their confidence and allows them to form more connections and friendships with other students. A flexible, dynamic classroom also gives teachers more opportunities to teach a variety of learning styles. Students with different needs no longer necessarily have to be separated from their peers to have those needs met. We include in our comments 3 different areas. First, neurodiversity and inclusive design. CPAC is excited to hear about the universal design for learning and diversity goals of this new educational space. New building project offers our community an important opportunity to improve in a sorely needed area as expressed by our families, inclusion of our students, and the issue of neurodiversity. We commend our current schools for their hard work in addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion to build environments that are more supportive along lines of racial, gender identification, linguistic, and cultural diversity. However, missing stones from a more robust intersectional approach will be the inclusion of neurodiversity as part of our conversation. The school building comes at a critical juncture in our continuing work to address these gaps, and CPAC requests that the school committee consider the importance of neurodiversity in thinking through the use case, its design, and the broader mission encased in it, and how that will be communicated to our families and special education students. We hope that the school building project will be centered to an inclusive design and facility, including but also beyond ADA compliance. Next issue is siblings. In previous public comments, CPAC strongly advised the school committee to revise its enrollment policy to allow siblings of students in the elementary specialized programs, aids, building blocks, and ILC to attend the school in which the special program is located. We are eager to hear an update on the status. One of the biggest selling points of the new elementary school is that this issue will be resolved, creating for a more inclusive context and allowing special ed kids to go to their own restricted schools along with siblings and neighborhood kids. And last but not least, is space and inclusive design. Two of CPAC's goals for this year are inclusion and diversity. We are eager for the building to promote as inclusive design as possible.
So I'm sharing on screen the text of that comment. I know it was a little muffled, so I apologize for that. But the full text is attached to the agenda. So now we'll go back to the first written comment that was sent, and I'll scroll more slowly. Okay. So as mentioned, the full text of both of these comments is attached to the agenda packet on Word docs. And with that, I'll turn it, next up is our superintendent's update, and I'll turn that over to you, Dr. Morris.
Excuse me, Allison. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Jennifer.
Yes, I will open the floor to any members of the public that are in this meeting that would like to speak, and I see one hand raised. So Tony Cunningham, please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Tony Cunningham, Owen Drive. I'd like to urge you all to consider what is before you this evening in the context of our extensive town capital needs. And while this educational program and accompanying space summary may be what is desired, I cannot see how it is affordable without negatively impacting other needed projects. Just as the fire station and public works facility have been allocated theoretical caps far below earlier cost estimates, this school project must also keep within a tight budget. I looked up recent cost data on similarly sized MSBA projects, and using a ballpark cost per square foot based on that data, I would guesstimate that the proposal for a 114,000 square foot building could cost $90 to $100 million, and the town would be responsible for a larger share of that cost. It behooves the school committee to push to get this proposed building down to a square footage that can be afforded within a realistic budget, perhaps $75 million. No town department will get all that it would want in a building if money were no object. The same must apply to the school. To help guide you, the MSBA very helpfully provides recommended square footage for an elementary school for 575 students. Instead of starting with what would be ideal to have in this school, I would encourage you instead to start with the MSBA guideline of 85,000 square feet, and anything additional must be vetted in the same stringent way that a change order would be vetted during construction. It must be an absolute necessity and fit within the budget. Approving this proposal as presented may put in jeopardy the passage of a debt exclusion override and will likely mean other capital projects that are equally as important to the town will be deferred indefinitely. Thank you.
Are there any others in the meeting that would like to speak? I'm not seeing any. Okay. So we'll move on now. Sorry about that. Moving on to the superintendent's update. Turn it back over to you, Dr. Morris.
Sure. I'll be, I always say brief, but tonight I'll actually be brief. Just 4 quick updates. One, a very exciting one that thanks to Katie Richardson, Shannon Bernacchia, who many of you met last year, our grants manager, Katie Richardson, our ELL coordinator, we received a sizable grant over $500,000 to support the Comandantes program. As is the case often with state grants, it needs to be expended by August 31st. So we put in a lot of things, but a lot of those funds go to teacher training courses that we're able to kind of prorate out and make it last a little longer for folks to receive their bilingual endorsement through local universities within our Commonwealth. It's also intended to support our summer programming, particularly with the interrupted year that occurred last year and the prior year. We know that we want to support all of our students who are in Comandantes and offer them a July experience if they so choose. And also we're able to support some work at the high school level as well. So it's not just Comandantes, but since it's an Amherst meeting, I'll wait to a regional meeting to describe that because the state allowed us to apply across different districts. So thanks to Katie, thanks to Shannon, and great news for our kids within that program and for the expansion in terms of curricular options as well. Second one, just update from each of the 3 schools. One, Martin Luther King Day, a longstanding tradition at Crocker Farm, was done virtually this year, but with no less gusto. So thanks to all the staff at Crocker Farm who celebrated that very important day. I know some people on this call in roles as parents or community members have attended Martin Luther King Day. Actually, many of the people on this call have participated in some way over the years in that day, and it's a fabulous tradition. So we appreciate it. The third update is just a thank you to the Fort River family group. A couple years ago, they donated cross-country ski equipment to the PE program, and well, we've gotten a little stymied with the latest weather. The kids did get out, and they were able to put on the cross-country skis and learn in the last 2 weeks, and it was just a fabulous parent initiative to support students who acquire a skill that's very useful in New England and not one that many students are exposed to at a young age. So thank you again. It was a couple years ago, but to the Fort River parent group who supported that. And the last one, African American Read-In Day at Wildwood. It was supposed to be last Friday, got snowed out, so it is tomorrow. It's a tradition that folks from the community in different roles come in, read a story, and all connected to African American History Month, which is in February, and just really nice connection with literacy. So many staff members at Wildwood contribute to that, and this will be my briefest update in a long time. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know we have a lot of other items on the agenda. Oh, I forgot one. I apologize. So I know I've said this at 2 other meetings, but I just do want to acknowledge Brian Ecclestone, who was a longtime employee in the technology department. We received a lovely email from a number of staff members, most of whom were Amherst Elementary music educators, about his tremendous work over the years, supporting their performances, solving lots of AV headaches, and most of the folks who wrote were retired from our district, but just wanted to reach out to let me and some others know about the great impact Brian had on our district. So I just want to acknowledge his passing and his tremendous work for our district. I knew Brian well in multiple roles, both when I was a teacher, principal, and then here at Central Office. And it's a great loss for our community. He was a local resident as well. He was a resident of Pelham, stayed connected to that particular school district. Just want to honor and acknowledge the passing of Brian Ecclestone. So I apologize for, I couldn't remember which districts I'd mentioned that, but I had not mentioned it here. But since he worked across all, I think his passing requires and deserves that attention.
Irv.
This is just a point of order. I had thought that we had agreed, and maybe it was a regional school, to use first names. So I was surprised when we were using Mr. or Ms. If that is to remain the same, then I would want to be called by my appropriate title, Dr. Rhodes.
Thank you. I apologize. It was force of habit, but also that was actually not discussed at this school committee. That was discussed at another school committee. So technically, we don't have any decision on the from the Amherst school committee. But I apologize for that, and we can have that discussion at a future meeting. But if folks are okay. I will continue with first names, since I also just called on you with your first name. Old habits die hard, so apologies. I'm seeing some head nods and thumbs up. Okay, cool. Peter.
Yeah, different topic. So just, I just want to underscore the appreciation for the work of Shannon and Katie for this grant. I mean, it's really an unprecedented grant level, and we do so much work, school committee, the community, our town government to advocate for funding in so many different ways, like around the margins and for amounts far less than what this grant is. And grant writing, I know, can be a real tough slog, a lot of thankless work of putting in a lot of hours into sometimes applications that go nowhere. So to get a result like this is really exceptional. And I just can't stress enough the appreciation, particularly, as foreshadowing a couple of items we have later on, and when we're not in the most comfortable operating budget times, and we really want to be ensuring that we provide the proper foundation, the strongest foundation possible for a new program like Caminates in its first years. It's really, really exceptional. So just thank you again to Shannon and Katie for the really wonderful result.
Other questions? Seeing none. Next up, in the chair's update, and I just have a couple of items. Peter and I met as part of the budget coordinating group. I can't remember, it was since our last meeting, but I don't remember the exact date. And received a presentation and just more discussion clarification on the overall budget that is rolled into tonight's budget, but there was no decision or recommendation or even a plan to meet again. So it was a short meeting. Well, not super short, but the other thing, I will be participating. I see Kathy Shane is on joining us tonight, but Kathy and I will be doing a community chat next week on Thursday, the 17th. I believe it's at 12 noon, but that is the town of Amherst is restarting those regular community chat series. And Kathy and I will be, I think, the first for this the restart of that. And then lastly, I meant to attach this in the public comment, the tribute to Brian Ecclestone that Dr. Morse was talking, but I thought I would just read I will attach it to the agenda tomorrow, but I just thought I would read a couple sentences from that letter, because it is, I didn't personally know him, but this really touched me to hear this. He's described, he was the glue that connected all of us together across programs, across buildings. He was the man behind the scenes who made all our programs run smoothly, bringing the joy of performance to our students and families. Brian was a wonderful gift to all of us, and we will miss him. It is our hope that the school district would be able to honor his legacy in a meaningful way. So I will attach that also to the public comment section of the agenda tonight, so folks can read the lovely tribute from the many retired music teachers. So with that, next up is school committee announcements. Are there other announcements from school committee members? Seeing none, we will move on to our first item in regular new and continuing business, which is our building project update and education plan presentation. So I see we have several guests joining us this evening, including Donna Denisco and Kathy Shane, the chair of the school building committee. So I'm not sure who I should turn this over to, whether to you, Mike, or to Kathy or Donna.
I think we can go straight to Donna. You know, I think maybe I'll do a 30-second intro. Donna, I don't know if you would like for me to project your slides or if you would like to project them yourself. Either way is fine.
I'll project them. I added those, a couple of additional notes.
Great. But I just want to, you know, thank the team, thank Kathy for her work, Ben for being the school committee rep, and Denisco for their continued work. And I want to share that this is the first draft. You know, something that I know the chair shared with the committee is that we'll come back to this not in 2 weeks, but in early March as we continue to receive more feedback and more information. So, you know, I want to appreciate the level of engagement. You know, I think the last meeting, school committee member was encouraging staff engagement. So there were opportunities, multiple opportunities, you know, one for all staff, but there were some follow-up conversations with specific groups of staff members to receive more information, and that will continue as we move forward. So Donna, I think with that intro, I'll turn it over to you, and let me know if you have any trouble, you know, getting the slides going, but.
Let's see if I can master this evening. So it's okay for me to just go ahead and share my screen?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, is everyone able to view this? Great. All right. So as Mike said, this is the first of the conversation, but it really is a pleasure to be here. Finally, it feels like we've been doing this for months, to present to you the draft educational program for the elementary school project. The draft before you culminates all of the work that you've done over the years to present, which also includes the 6th grade moving over to the middle school. Going too fast. In addition, and as part of the programming process, we've reached out to the leadership team, staff, and community through meetings and visioning sessions to obtain any new ideas and goals. We have validated and confirmed the guiding principles and learning goals, that they have not changed. Your mission and core values have not changed and are reflected through the educational program. We've also confirmed the key educational focus areas remain the same. And as part of the outreach, and we'll continue the outreach as we move forward, but we've also asked the community what was important to them. And here's just a response from the two community the visioning meetings that we had that are important, what was important to the community. And we understand that the polling sample is very small, but this just highlights what's important to the community as we receive their input. Sorry, fast fingers here. So the educational program is the first important step within the MSBA program. Right now, We're at the preliminary design program, and we plan to submit it on March 15th or mid-March. And the educational program is really the focus and the important aspect of the PDP, is what we call it. The educational program identifies the programs offered district-wide, not just at the combined school. It identifies the programs to be offered within the quote-unquote new Amherst Elementary School. It also identifies the programmatic spatial relationships and adjacencies. And then, as everyone has gleaned, the program defines the space needs and the total square footage for the project. With that, I just want to reiterate that MSBA has established 2 enrollment configurations as part of the project. The first enrollment option is the Fort River only elementary school. The original enrollment was for 320 students, grades K through 6, which was the current enrollment configuration at the time of your submission to MSBA or agreed upon. But since the acceptance of the enrollment certificate, the school committee confirmed that the 6th grade will be moving to the middle school. So what MSBA has done is recognize that there is excess capacity at Wildwood and Crocker Farm because the 6th graders are moving out. So what they did was they populated some of your enrollment to those 2 schools. So what this does per MSBA is that they modified the enrollment capacity for the Fort River only school from 320 students to 165 students, grades K through 5. This was a conversation that we had with them as part of our original kickoff meeting, and we're still waiting for the official revised enrollment certificate. But this is what they've told us to do going forward for the Fort River only elementary school. I'd also like to point out that with Fort River Elementary only option, the district-wide programs would remain at each of the 3 schools. The second option is the combined Fort River and Wildwood schools, and that is, as everyone knows, is a grades K through 5 with an enrollment of 575 students. And with that is the consolidation of the 3 district-wide programs would be included in this educational program. So what we'd like to do is just kind of take you through how we arrive at the general educational classrooms or the gen ed classrooms. So in order to arrive at how many classrooms per grade are required, you take the total enrollment, and the easiest way is just to divide it amongst the 6 grades that will be present in the school at the time. I'll go quickly on the Fort River only school option, but at 165 students, you're looking at roughly 27, 28 students per grade. We then take into consideration your class size policies, and we understand the goal is always to remain at the lower end of the policy. So we try to kind of take a little bit of the middle of the road number of students. So with an average number of students per class at 19 at the lower end, and then 20 for grades 2 through 5, you do the math, you take the number of students in, per grade, per class, as the policy states, into the number of students per grade, and you arrive at the number of classrooms required for each grade. So as you can see, when you exceed, over 1.25, you really need to bump up that number of classrooms per grade up. So you certainly don't want to have 27 students in a classroom. So you really want to have 2 classrooms per grade. So when you run that out through each of the 6 grades, you arrive at 12 classrooms total, gen ed classrooms. So when we look at the Fort River and Wildwood combined school with 575 students, again, just taking that total enrollment, dividing it by the 6 grades. And we understand that it probably never really occurs this evenly, but this is the easiest way to make this, to demonstrate the need. Then you take the number of students per class, again, 19 for K and 1, 20 students for grades 2 through 5, and that will inform you of the number of classrooms needed per grade. So as you can see with the lower, utilizing the lower class size policies at the upper grades, it's still translating to 5 classrooms per grade. We ran this model out all the way through with pretty much all of the options. Happy to go through it with you. But the one option that comes up that actually dictates or demonstrates that you only need 4 classrooms in grades 4 and 5 is when you're at the upper end of your class size policy of 24 students. That would demonstrate that you only need 4 classrooms per grade instead of 5. And there are some trade-offs, right? You have 5 classrooms per grade, grades K through 3. Then all of a sudden you merge those and you have 4 classrooms per grade. But also thinking forward, the impact that might have on the Caminantes program, where the Caminantes program requires 2 classrooms per grade, leaving only 2 classrooms for those that are not enrolled in that program. But as part of all of this, the total number of general classrooms only tells part of the story. And I know all of you, we've shared the very preliminary MSBA proposed space summary with you all, but I'd like just to take a minute to highlight and go through some of the categories with you. I think first, what's really important to understand is that each community is unique, especially with their core academic and special education needs. So what we've done is we've taken the educational program, which identifies all the programs that are provided within the combined Fort River Wildwood schools when it's one school, and we have broken it down by program to demonstrate what is required. The core academic includes not only your gen ed classrooms, it includes a STEM room or an STE room, it includes ELL spaces, and then it also includes space to accommodate the resources for Title I, the lit specialists, literacy specialists, and your math specialists. So what I'd like to point out here under MSBA guidelines, and for those of you that maybe have looked at the space summary, what MSBA was not necessarily reflecting in their guideline column was they were only showing 26 gen ed classrooms, not the 30 that we're suggesting. Even if you want to go down to 28, the 28 is still more than the MSBA, what MSBA is demonstrating in their space summary. However, what they've also said is they understand that you want to have consistent number of classrooms per grade and that wouldn't be an issue going forward. In addition, the 25,950 net floor area does not include the STE space, even though they say you should have one for every 350 students, grades 3 through 5. It does not include space for ELL, which is a mandated program, and it doesn't include spaces for your Title I resources. And we have never had a program where MSBA has said that they would not support those spaces. Those total approximately 8,900 square feet that we would expect MSBA to support. The special ed column or category is also extremely unique within every district. And MSBA just takes a prescriptive square footage based on the number of students, and they come up with you need 4 dedicated spaces or self-contained classrooms, which doesn't normally support the special ed programs. So we have gone through all of your special ed programs and all of the others auxiliary spaces to support these programs, such as a BCBA, your learning centers, small group instruction spaces, OTPT, spaces for your educational team leader, their conference room that's required, adjustment counselors, and psychologists. All of these people support you and the special ed program. So when we submit the educational program along with this space summary, DESE, will be reviewing your special ed aspect of the program, and they will approve it or ask questions. Why do you have this program? Are you sure you have enough space? Do you have too much space? And they will be the ones to approve your educational spaces as it relates to special ed. MSBA will endorse and support whatever DESE supports as well. Again, we've never actually had a project that has had such low special ed space requirements of 6,000. So I think that's just really important to note. All the other spaces are pretty much mandated by MSBA. If you go under, that's okay. But the categories below core academic and special ed are the categories that if you exceed MSBA guidelines, they will not participate in the reimbursement of those spaces. But working with Dr. Morris, what we did is we went through and we looked at every single line item carefully. Dr. Morris states that you really only need one art room for the enrollment, that he believes that they can schedule most of the students through one art room. And then those that do have a little overflow can utilize the STE room, because that probably will not be utilized 100% of the time. We do believe that 2 music spaces are required for your program. Health and PE are right within MSBA guidelines. The media center is
Donna,
within.
can I just
Yep.
Can I jump
Sure.
in just on the music front?
Sure.
Just want to note that that second music space, again, much like the art space, is for overflow, because we know we'll have more than just for one room. And it also allows us to think about ensembles and instrumental music, which is a critical component of our program here in Amherst. We did have some email dialogue, and Donna, I'm not sure I mentioned, but I did meet with them, a group of the instrumental music teachers last week about their needs. So it's trying to think as creatively as we can about multi-use spaces so that the building can be as efficient as possible and support the wonderful enrichment and specials programs that we have at the elementary level. I just wanted to emphasize the instrumental piece because I think it is important to note that as well.
Can I just interrupt and ask,
Yes.
and I apologize if you said this at the very beginning of this slide, but can you restate what each column means? The heading, because I see Fort River and Wildwood at MSBA and then MSBA. So I'm a little confused as to what's the difference between
So
them.
I think, yes, thank you. I think this got cut off. So the first 2 columns are Fort River only at MSBA standards, and then you have MSBA guidelines. So utilizing MSBA standards, which means the square footages that they prescribe for classrooms for the individual spaces, but you're modifying them to accommodate your program. And then this column here, the MSBA guidelines, specifically is translated from the space summary that MSBA says we're not allowed to modify that column in the space summary. And I'm happy to share the space summary with you as well. And maybe that might be more helpful when we get into a conversation. So this is what you would need based on your educational program to, from a space perspective, utilizing MSBA's square footage amounts. For example, a general classroom is somewhere between 900 and 1,000, right? So we're saying based on your programs, MSBA has guidelines on the space net floor area for each space. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. And then again, so the Fort River only, and then what I was focusing on is the Fort River and Wildwood schools. So it's taking MSBA guidelines and applying it to your individual and unique programs as they apply to each of the different categories. Does that make sense? Thank you. Sorry about that. So the Media Center, we believe that we can provide a wonderful space for the students within MSBA guidelines. And then we also looked at the dining components. We were looking at every opportunity to reduce the overall square footage or program space for the building. MSBA has a 7,823 net floor area for dining, which includes the cafeteria, the kitchen, the stage, and teacher dining. So it's not just a cafeteria. I don't want anyone to think you're getting a 700-800 square foot cafeteria. But they base that net floor area on having only 2 seatings for lunch. So that would be half of your student population all sitting down having lunch at one time. I don't think I've ever been involved in a project where that's realistic. So Dr. Morris said that we would be having 3 seatings for lunch. So we actually reduced the overall square footage of the cafetorium, making sure though that it wasn't too small so we could also utilize it for assembly space. And as you can see, the medical and administrative needs are in line with MSBA's guidelines, and the custodial and maintenance space are within line with MSBA. And we strongly recommend any of the spaces other than core academic and special ed, if you do exceed those spaces, MSBA would not participate in reimbursing above and beyond MSBA's guidelines. So we have adhered to their guidelines above and beyond the core academic and special ed. So you have a subtotal program. So this is your program space needs, the net floor area within the building. We're demonstrating we need 75,800. MSBA is saying 59,596. What they need to also factor in is the 8,900 that you need to support the number of classrooms per grade, the STE that they mandate, your ELL programs, and your Title I resource spaces. And then again, approximately 7,000 square feet in special ed to support the 3 special ed programs and the other services for the other students in the school. So that is the difference between the program space, 75,800 to 59,500. MSBA then says, okay, here's your program. Now what you have is what they call grossing factor. And MSBA will not exceed 1.5. So you take 1.5 of your program area, multiply it by 1.5, and that's how you arrive at your gross square feet. Once we start developing the school, of course, the number may modify a little bit. It will never exceed 1.5. We know MSBA will not participate in it. But that additional space is for bathrooms. It's for corridors. It's for actually the wall thickness. It's for custodian closets. It's for all your mechanical spaces, which obviously need space. So it's for anything to support the building that is not a program related space. And so that's what they call grossing factor would be. So again, MSBA, they have this prescriptive method in their space summary. And for whatever reason, the math doesn't quite work appropriately when you look at their space summary. They're using a factor of, I think it was 1.43 instead of the 1.5. And they acknowledge it. They understand that it's incredibly challenging to get it to 1.5 grossing factor, let alone to 1.43. So I just grossed up MSBA's to the appropriate 1.5 of the total program area. So MSBA's at 89,000 plus the programs for core academic and special ed, compared to the 113,765. And these are, very preliminary numbers, and we're certainly available or just here to answer any questions that anyone may have about this. There's still work to do, but we don't want to present something that is so minimized at this point in time until we haven't even laid out the building yet. So one program may need a little more space just because of the configuration of the building, or the adjacencies of the programs are also critically important. So that would be our next step. But MSBA wants to see, along with your educational program, what you're thinking for the space needs to accommodate the educational program. So I don't know if you want me to pause here to ask some questions. That might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. I just had, so said another way, the difference between those two peach colored columns, the combined school, the real difference is the class size.
The difference is certain
The number of classrooms that we need, which is dictated by our policy on class size.
Yep, that's one component. And again, MSBA recognizes it, and they said that in the kickoff meeting as well, that we understand you want to have a consistent number of classrooms per grade, like it right? And so they acknowledge that. If you want, I can share the space summary. I don't know if that would be helpful so people could see, unless you all have it. I could certainly share that if that would be helpful as we ask some of the questions, and you can see what I was referring to.
Allison, if I could just finish up in supporting Donna. So I think, the class is definitely in terms of core academic, but the ELL, the Title I pieces were the other components that are not accounted for in the MSBA. And again, Donna can share this. You don't need to do it now. I mean, we'll get there, I'm sure. On the core academic side, that makes the MSBA guidelines of about 2,600. And that's the delta. The primary delta are those, the ELL, the Title I, and then the difference in the number of classrooms based on class size.
And the STE classroom.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
That they mandate, but for whatever reason, it doesn't calculate in their guidelines. So that's an extra 1,200 square feet of space.
Why don't we see if there's other questions from the committee before we dig deeper into some details?
Perfect.
Are there questions? Jennifer?
So am I right in saying that we don't know yet what the MSBA will fund or reimburse us for? Right?
Correct.
We don't yet know. When in the process do we find out?
So once we submit the PDP, MSBA will review it and respond pretty quickly. Within 3 weeks or so, we'll be receiving their feedback, and we would respond accordingly. In our entire career and working with MSBA, have we ever had to modify a core academic or a special ed? That's not to say there might be different ways for your community to achieve your goals and recognizing and providing spaces for your programs. But MSBA, your programs currently exist. And if your programs currently exist, MSBA, especially in the special ed and DESE, want to make sure that you are providing the appropriate and adequate spaces for these students. They do not want anyone to come back later in their careers and say, we're teaching, we're teaching our hearing students in a closet because we don't have enough special ed space, right? So they want to make sure, and that's why DESE is involved in reviewing that, to make sure that you have adequate space for your special ed programs that currently exist. But Jennifer, if they do come back and say, maybe you should consider something, of course we would, right? So this is not final.
I'll come back. If you have a follow-up question, Jennifer, then raise your hand. I'll come back after other folks have had a chance to ask the first question. So Peter?
Yeah, so thank you for the explanation of this. I think it's pretty confusing to the layperson that DESE would have this this requirement template, right? But not include things that they know they're going to require, like the STE and the ELL and Title I, the special ed, and the special ed approved by by DESE. So it's so I appreciate the line item. You're taking the time to explain the DESE approval process there, because it can look at first glance like, well, this is what DESE says you should do. Oh, but this is what you're pie in the sky wishing for, and there's a disconnect. So I appreciate that that explanation. So I'm assuming the answer is no, but I just thought I would ask it anyway. Is it possible at this point to start making cost estimates or assumptions? I mean, I think the first time we applied to the MSBA, we started getting cost questions, right? So, with our statement of interest. So I think that will always be understandably top of mind for everybody involved in this. But if you could just maybe speak to, in your experience, at what point in this entire journey do we start to see the picture coming into form of where we might be ballpark with what the final?
I believe will be before you March 8th. And what we'll have is it's order of magnitude costs, Peter, but as part of the preliminary design program submission, we have, I think, how many options? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 options that we're going to have to submit to MSBA. These are all the options under consideration. We have 3 for the Fort River only school. We have to do a repair job, a renovation only, a renovation addition, and new construction option for the Fort River only. Recognizing it's 165 students, but we have to go through the process. And then we'll be looking at a renovation addition and new construction at both Wildwood and Fort River sites. So we'll have 7 options or concepts or alternatives, I think is what their term is at this point, with rough order of magnitudes. And so that will help inform. They'll be more in line with cost per square foot at this point, because we haven't really designed or created a basis of design, which establishes a lot of the parameters for the building. But we'll also identify costs for the geothermal. We'll identify the costs the best that we can for, the PVs, the solar canopies and arrays that are being considered for this project, et cetera. So they'll be preliminary, and we'll be modifying them as we actually start designing. But you'll start to see order of magnitude at that point.
Thank you.
If it's okay, I'd like to give Irv a chance to ask his question. So, Irv.
Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate the level of detail you've gone through this evening. It's been really helpful. I also would appreciate it if we, the school committee, could put this in summary form and put it out to the general community. Because as you noticed from one comment tonight, there are some assumptions out there that are not supportable. But those assumptions will continue to be made unless really good information is put out to them, as we are witnessing tonight. Other thing is that what you have done, Donna, is clarify a lot of questions out there. And I think one big numbers of questions are going to come about when I heard you say about the options that are going to have to be presented. I can guarantee you, given that we are Amherst, that all of those options are going to be scrutinized to the nth degree. And so we, as a school committee and other professionals, really need to be able to communicate in a very clear and thoughtful manner and a transparent manner how those options that are being put out there are going to be studied, and then one of them being adopted. Those are some upcoming challenges.
Jennifer. Oh, sorry, Donna, did you have a response?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond that so for the first go around with the PDP, I believe, and I know Kathy Shane's on the call, that we are recommending to MSBA that we continue to evaluate all of the options. We have no choice with Fort River only. So really we have to study the Fort River 3 options, and then looking at the 4 options, which is a renovation, addition, and new construction at both Fort River and Wildwood, that we want to continue to study those through the end of the preferred schematic before we submit to MSBA with our preferred solution. So that will give us 3 additional months to continue those conversations with you about cost. How can we get the cost down? What are those costs, right? So those conversations will continue, and we're not asking you to make a decision on your preferred solution until June. And it's not just Amherst. I just, this is an enormous investment, and usually one of the largest investments in any community. And it's appropriate for people to want to make sure that they fully understand the costs and can support it. So we're with you the whole time, and we'll make sure that we provide the information in a way that makes sense for you all.
Jennifer.
Thanks. Donna, can you give us a ballpark estimate or an upper and lower range for cost per square foot, just based on your extensive experience with school projects, like roughly in our enrollment size? I mean, can you give us something to work with?
Could if it's possible, I would prefer just to wait until March 8th is when we'll be before you. And I say that part of the challenges are understanding if there are unique features of your project. Trying to achieve net zero is one of them. The 2 sites can also have impacts on the cost. And so I would prefer not to necessarily be able to do that. The other consideration right now, and we actually submit this to a cost estimator who will help us understand what the market value is today, will help us talk about inflation costs or escalation costs as it relates to schools and what that means. We won't be going out to construction until 2024. And the construction has really shifted over the past few years with the escalation costs. So without putting my foot in my mouth, I normally would love to say yes, but I don't want to guess where we think we are with escalation right now.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Are there other questions? Peter?
How often do projects, when they're all said and done, come close to the grossing factor? I'm just wondering how much is that really close to, like, that 1.5 to 1.43 to what it actually ends up being, or is it, well, most projects when it's actually come in at 1.2 or 1.3, just in your experience?
1.5 is challenging. So anything below that, it's ironic. If you even look at MSBA's guidelines here, you can see that their formula is so out of whack that they were saying we could design a building for an extra 1,000, 2,000 square feet here. But 1.5 is actually a very, very conservative approach to all of the other systems that are required. All of the bathrooms, the corridors, right? We have WIS that we have to comply with for code. We have to comply with size of bathrooms. Like this 1.5 is, we do it. We hit it every time. We like to come in like 1.49 if possible. But as we start the design, you'll understand all of the supplemental needs to support the building. And I believe Mr. Harrington's here, and him being in the facilities world might be able to understand a little more about all of the supports that are needed to make a building work.
I'm going to, I have another question, sort of building off of what Irv had talked about earlier about sort of ease, sort of simplifying this, or ease of understanding and communication of sort of how we got to the different square footage or space calculations. And so I'm just wondering again, because I think I understand, but you have these dark boxes drawn around 4 numbers at the bottom of the page. Can you explain in sort of plain English
Sure,
what
Yeah,
one
so-
is and what the other one
Yeah.
is, just so that people understand that? Because I think people that aren't as close to this as maybe the building committee and some folks that are
Or-
may not
Or
understand.
me, and I apologize, right? I feel like you should know what NFA even means, right? So anyway, so again, you come down to the subtotal program and pick a column, any column. MSBA states that you can gross the program up by 1.5. It's called grossing factor. So again, if we take the 42,333 for the Fort River only, based on your educational program utilizing MSBA square footage standards for the spaces, you gross that up at 1.5, you arrive at a gross square footage of the building of 63,500. As I just pointed to, per MSBA's space summary guidelines, there's a flaw in their formula. I don't think they've ever built a building for only 165 students. So their formula doesn't even know how to calculate it. But they're saying, per their space summary, that the gross square footage of a building should only be 29,700. They've all agreed that that's not realistic in the least, and that we should use the 1.5 grossing factor. So really what we're looking at is the 42,117 number. And then similarly with the combined school, their grossing factor is off by a little bit. And so utilizing the 1.5, we really should be focusing on the 89,394. That said, you still need to add in all of the other programs, such as the increase in number of classrooms, the STE rooms, the ELL, your Title I resources, as well as the additional special ed spaces.
I guess I was also thinking about what's the difference between the 113 and the 89. Just again,
Yeah, the difference comes down to your subtotal program. So you take the 75,843 and times that by 1.5, and you'll arrive at 113. If you take the 59,596 at 1.5, you'll arrive at 89,394. So if you take, and I believe MSBA will support these programs, and add the 8,900 into this net floor area of core academic, supplement the 6,040 with your actual needs for special ed, make the reductions as we've done here for art and for dining, we will be so closely aligned for the subtotal program, and then you take the subtotal program and times that by 1.5. So the program drives the overall gross square footage of the building. So whatever we agree to with MSBA, whether it's 75,000, 75,800, 74, whatever the final number is, that we have to take the program number and multiply that by 1.5 to get your total gross square footage. As long as MSBA approves the program, which they will, we'll come to an agreement with them. And we will not provide spaces that they will not participate in their reimbursement, that you take the total program and it's just an automatic 1.5. As we start designing the building, we'll never exceed the 1.5, we'll never exceed the total gross square footage, whether it's 113 or it won't be 89, but whatever that number is, we will be designing to that number. We will meet all of your educational program needs, and we will stay within the 1.5. And that's important for us as we start mapping out your massing. What does a 1-story, 2-story, 3-story options look like? All of the requirements. Again, I don't want to belittle the bathrooms. Bathrooms are actually a really large part of this. Now we need gender neutral bathrooms. Now we need, multiple stall bathrooms. So there's a lot of other support spaces that are required to round out an entire building. But we will never exceed the 1.5.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Am I on mute now? Okay, let's see. I feel like we're in a little bit of a tricky position, or at least I shouldn't speak for everyone. I feel like I'm in a little bit of a tricky position because taking a step back, it's really important to me, as I'm sure it's important to all of us, that this project have wide community support. Because we want our community to support and be excited about this project, and also because we're going to need voters to approve the debt exclusion override. So we want to make sure that people can get behind this project. And though we only need 50% plus one of voters, I would love to see like 60, 65, 75% of voters approve it. And so that's something that we have to keep in mind. And so I feel like we are being asked to approve this programming and the square footage without knowing what the cost is going to be. And I hear you saying that we'll have the cost figures March 8th, but that's also the day we're supposed to vote on this and then submit. So I feel like something's missing in my thought process and in my decision tree. And like I feel a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, I'm glad that we're talking about this now, and we'll have more chances to talk about it. But I feel a little uncomfortable with not having enough information.
Mike or Donna?
Yeah, if I could jump in. So I want to really acknowledge that and thank you for sharing it. And I want you to know that if you're seeing things on what was shared that you feel like don't need to be in the program, now's a good time, or next meeting is a good time to talk about it. So, I think by no means am I, and I don't want to speak for Donna, but I think I can, suggesting that this is a final version. I think we were really clear on the ed program that it's draft. And if there are things that school committee members feel like, no, you really included something that ought not to be in there, or the classrooms are too large, or we want to revisit the class size policy, all those things, there's no defensiveness on Donna's part or my part to have those conversations. The philosophy of the MSBA, and this was shared at our kickoff meeting, is the educational program drives the building. And the reason that this happens before you make other decisions along the way is the belief that they have in the structure is that the ed program then defines what goes into the building. And certainly in many communities, I know from my colleagues, there's people who feel like there are things in the ed program that are frivolous, and they have discussions, frivolous is maybe a strong word, but are not needed. And I just want to say that I'm open to that. Right. So, I mean, I think not just for Jennifer, but if any school committee member or anyone looks at this and says, well, actually, I don't think we need that, or that's too large, that's useful feedback, right? That's the reason we bring it to school committee, because eventually you're going to vote on it. So if there was any perception that this is fait accompli, I want to clarify that the reason we're having the conversation is that school committee may have different opinions. It may, I'm hesitant to give examples because I'm putting words in people's mouths that may say them later, and that's not what I want to do right now. But certainly, please do ask questions about what's in there, and certainly that feedback will be taken into account. And at the end of the day, you'll have to vote yay or nay, right, on the ed program. But this is kind of where we are. But that's not to say that this is the final draft, and that's why we wouldn't think of asking for the school committee. It's actually a month from now to the day when the school committee would be voting on an ed program. So I think if there is plenty of time, if committee members have concerns about excess space or parts of the program we don't need, or wants to revisit the class size policy, because that really drives, as Donna said, the need for additional classrooms above and beyond what MSBA indicated. I think those are really useful conversations and discussions, and no one, myself, I can speak, I don't want to speak for Donna, but no one's shying away from having those discussions about, what's needed. It's, we had some conversation today, and I think, there are maybe some small ways we can look at Title I, and, it's sort of represented in a couple different areas, and we may, it's not huge amounts of square footage, but we're looking at every place we can find it for all the reasons that you indicated, Jennifer. So I just want to really clarify that if there are questions, concerns from committee members, or disagreements or debates, that's great. And so I want to be really clear that that's really the approach that we're taking. And Kathy's on the call. I'm not going to ask her to participate as a school committee member, but I know that that's how she's leading her meetings too on the building committee, that, you know, we're really open to that. And we wanted to share what we think is a reasonable first draft of the educational program, as well as the space summary, so that we could have those discussions, that people could ask questions. And some people may go the other way and they may say, I'm a little concerned, right? We heard from some first grade teachers and primary grade teachers that they were concerned that there's not bathrooms in any classrooms other than kindergarten. That's per MSBA. But we're trying to take all that feedback. Some would increase square footage. That's an example I just gave you, would increase cost, as well as other ideas that would decrease cost, and come up with the best plan for the community. So sorry that's long-winded, but I just want to really reset that. Certainly if there are questions that you have, Jennifer, or any of the committee members on this, or if you want to change some of the program or change class size policy, right, we'll respond accordingly with the educational program. It's trying to figure out what are the needs of students in Amherst, and how can a project that's supposed to last at least 50 years be flexible enough to accommodate them over time.
Yeah, just to echo Dr. Morris, again, I don't know if anyone was around way back before MSBA was involved, but the way MSBA works is they don't want a district to say, we only have $50 million, what can we get? That's not how they operate, right? It's about the educational program. And so they work very hard with you to establish the number of students per the enrollment, right? They really spend a lot of time making sure that everyone's comfortable with the approved or agreed upon enrollment numbers. And that's the basis. And then from there, they are asking you for the educational program, because they don't want you to back a program into a cost per square foot, or say, we only have, what can we get for $50 million? Like that isn't their approach. They want to make sure that you have thoughtfully vetted your educational program and make sure that your educational programs are supported district-wide. I don't want to put anything out there, but for example, you're combining two schools, which has some impacts for some of the programs. Perhaps instead of combining all of the programs, you could say, well, some of the programs may go to another school or whatever. But MSBA doesn't even want to talk money really until they understand what your educational goals are for this project. I hope that clarifies. I know it's hard what comes first, right? The chicken or the egg, but at the same time, per MSBA and DESE, that you have to have your educational program first, which will inform the space needs.
Sorry, I couldn't find my cursor. Kathy, were you responding to that, or do you have a separate question? Because there's several hands up too. So
take the other questions first, Allison. I just had a comment to make about what the building committee has and hasn't seen.
Got it. I'll come back to you. Keep your hand up, Peter.
Yeah. Was Irv's hand up before mine, or I just want to make sure we're good? Okay, great.
Yes.
Sorry.
I said yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll let Irv go first. I think he was ahead of me in the queue.
Okay. Irv.
I think that this is really useful, and I think that when I'm listening to it, and I know that there are members of the general public who are listening to it. I also know that there will be members of the general public who will be looking at this video. And one of the things that I really, really want the school committee to emphasize is this building is being driven by the ED program. The ED program is being driven by the philosophy of the school district. And when those two things are combined, it is something that then comes down to this building design. And so I think that one of the things leading up to this March date is that there has to be, and I would really, really encourage us to engage in a robust, thorough transparent discussion and engagement with the town and town members and relationship to the ed program, and to explain it and to go over it so that everyone understands what it is. You know, if you take out certain parts of the ed program, then you are taking out parts that may affect other parts of the program. And that needs to be understood. It is not, you know, it's not like the ed program comes in and you think, well, we'll take out A, B, C, D, and E and we'll reduce the cost. But if you take out A, B, C, D, and E, you affect the entire overall program. And that needs to be understood. Secondly, the cost factor that needs to be understood that we do not know anything about now is what are the cost implications of getting net zero in the building? What are those cost implications? And those cost implications for obtaining net zero in terms of this building need to be put out there for the general public, and they need to be put out there now.
Peter.
Yeah, so I'm glad Irv brought that point up, and I also appreciate the comments from all my colleagues tonight. I think we're hitting on a lot of points that are important to this discussion. You know, I share the wish to know the dollar sign, you know, ticket, as I'm sure we all do, as soon as possible. But I also understand the need to wait further, and I think the point about net zero and just exactly what the community wants to invest at what level for sustainability net zero is a real open question at this point. And that affects the dollar signs a lot. So you know, I understand the need to wait for that. And you know, the need to focus on the ed plan to Dr. Morris's earlier point. So to bring the attention to that, I mean, I'll just say briefly, after having, you know, done a read or two through the draft ed plan, I support our class size policy. I support, speaking just for myself, the dual language Caminates program that requires 3 classrooms in every grade if there's going to be a classroom with students who aren't in Caminates in the building. I support separate spaces for our 3 in-district special ed programs that not all districts have. That is a community value that I'm very happy that we have, but require extra space. I support adequate space for ELL and Title I, and generally speaking, the other services identified in this education plan. I'm glad we have another month to dig into the details and get more community feedback, so we can hone in on certain things. But generally speaking, my take on the ed plan from a first read is that I don't see large S in this. I don't see pie in the skyness. I see this is what we currently provide. And as we all know, you know, Amherst provides a lot more than the average school district in Massachusetts. And we do that out of value and out of policy in terms of class size and special ed programs and whatnot. So that's how I'm currently feeling about that in terms of the ed plan and what our discussion wants to be in terms of scope.
I'm really glad you went back to the ed plan and sort of some of those principles, because that's where my head was going, was like, you know, this idea that we can somehow just chop off 20,000 square feet from here, and we're being too pie in the sky. And I just want to go back to, well, we've got numbers, hard numbers right in front of us, that are informed by the principles and the philosophies and the mission that you've outlined in the education program. And so what we're being asked is that what we as a school committee believe and want to support and endorse for our elementary schools. And so I'm looking at the numbers, which is why I apologize for asking all those questions for clarity in terms of what these columns mean, because, you know, the difference between that subtotal program, well, that's the difference. That subtotal program is the amount of space defined by that education program, and the difference between the MSBA guidelines of 59,000-ish and 75,000-ish. If you look at all the numbers going up through that column, the only differences is in that core academic. The difference is, I think, what you described as the difference between the 6,000 and the 12,000 for special ed are all things that we don't really have a choice of not to do. Is that so? It's a fault in the formula with.
Yeah. So and even with MSBA's 25,950, again, This is just a formula. We're not allowed to touch that column, the MSBA guideline column. They acknowledge that it is totally logical to have the same number of classrooms per grade. So even though they say, per their space summary, that you only get 26 classrooms, they understand that you need 30. You should have the same number of classrooms per grade. So they're not going to say, no, you cannot have that space. It's just not going to be reflected right now. Once we go through, and there were other things, right? They tell you need an STE, but for whatever reason, there's no formula that includes the 1,200, which would be in addition to the 25,950. ELL and your Title I resources, all of those are MSBA driven, the STE, and then of course through DOE for ELL and your Title I. So once we submit this to MSBA, maybe I'll just go a step further. Once we submit your educational program with the preliminary space summary, MSBA will say, we agree. They literally will go line item by line item and say, we take exception to it. Well, for example, and Dr. Morris, I hope you don't mind me saying, first graders, teachers said, we need bathrooms in our first grade classrooms. That's really important to us. That would have increased the square footage. And we said, well, MSBA doesn't allow bathrooms in first grade classrooms. So we'll make sure that we make the bathrooms are in close proximity to your first grade classrooms. But had we added that space and put a toilet room in the space summary for first graders, MSBA would have come back and said, you can have it, we don't support it, and we won't pay for it. They will go through literally line item by line item, take exception or not take exception to the spaces that we're identifying, as long as, and make sure that it's supported within your educational program. Does that help? I hate showing this MSBA guidelines column because it doesn't mean anything. I've never had anyone live within these confines.
I guess
but
my point was more sort of just like looking grossly, like if we wanted to look for places to cut space, the only places really that we could cut space is in that core academic, because unless we wanted to eliminate art or eliminate music or eliminate, right? Like, I mean,
it's so a couple of places, and being fully transparent, you know, we could make the classroom slightly smaller by 25 feet or something, which might shave off a little bit. We are recognized, and the reason why we put the square footage that we did is that you have some classrooms that are co-teached. And so if that's the case, you actually need the space in the classrooms. But you know, with Dr. Morris, we can walk through, you know, how small can we really get these classrooms? MSBA says the guidelines are 900 to 1,000, and we need to have 2 sinks. So we have to make sure that we have the area required for the teaching spaces and the flexible groupings and all of that stuff. But we can talk about that with Dr. Morris. How small can we really go, right? Maybe that's shaving off 25-50 square feet per classroom. Some of the other spaces, you know, we can talk about the special ed, but we want to make sure that we have the services or the spaces for the services, and they will look at that. Some of the other areas, you know, we could reduce the media center. MSBA isn't saying you have to have 3,258 square feet, but we're not going to pay for more than that. That might be an area, but media centers tends to be the heart of a school, and there's a lot of activities go in there. So we can have that conversation. Another conversation again would be the dining. If we reduce the cafeteria portion of the dining any further, it's a possibility, but don't forget that's for full assemblies. That's where your stage is going to be. So that is where your performances are going to be. So it's not just for dining, but it's also for any, performances or assemblies or anything. So that's another area. We probably wouldn't recommend that, but that it's 100% your call. The other stuff, the medical is not large at all. And given that you have the ILC program, we would absolutely recommend leaving that alone. Admin is lean. And again, there are line items on the space summary. It is lean. And so we don't recommend. And then the custodial maintenance, again, that's lean too. And a lot of times it isn't sufficient. So we have to make up part of the 1.5, the non-program space, to support the custodial maintenance spaces. So to answer your question, sorry, I rambled a little bit in core academic. We can take a hard look on special ed. Your call on your media center, your dining. You can reduce your gym, right? The gym's 6,000 square feet, but you might need 2 sections at a time. And if this is the only, it's 6,000, so it's a regulation gym that could be used for high schoolers. And so you don't have a lot of peripheral, like standing, it'll be standing room only. You don't get bleachers or anything like that, but it's a full court. Maybe you don't need a full court in town. Maybe you have other facilities that could support, basketball or whatever. Maybe that's an area to reduce.
Thank you. Jennifer?
So my brain kind of went where yours did, Allison, when looking at these 2 columns, the 2 peach columns, the 2 rows that are the biggest, and the 2 rows where the difference between the 2 columns are biggest are core academic and special ed. And those are, the numbers are big. And I'm sure there's a lot of detail in there that's not reflected in here. And I know it's in the more detailed spreadsheet. So I guess, I have many thoughts going through my head. Maybe there are places where we can reduce in ways that wouldn't affect our programming in the core academic, since that number is so big. I think I would like to have the time to be able to really dig into what's in those figures. So I have a question about timing, and also regarding special ed. This may not be the place to bring it up, but currently we have 3 special ed programs located in 2 different schools. And the model of bringing the 3 into 1 school is a different model from what we're currently delivering. And I feel that that's a discussion that needs to happen within this committee. That change in policy is a discussion that should happen within this committee, separate from this decision, separate but within the context of this decision, because maybe that's a way to reduce the special ed square footage, because right now it's more than double what MSBA guidelines say. And I know you're saying that it's customized to each town, and that makes sense. But I'm just throwing in that little monkey wrench in there, because I feel like that's an important policy change that should be discussed, as I said, separately, but within the context of this. My question about timing is, we have this meeting, and then we have March 8th when we're supposed to vote on this. And I know that we recently removed the extra February 22nd meeting, but I kind of feel like we should put it back, because I don't want to look at this, give you input now, and then meet again in a month, and then we have to vote. I feel like I would like to add back that February 22nd meeting, so that we can have another opportunity to touch base and review any changes you might make, or really dig into the numbers and be able to give you some more input.
And I don't know if it would be
Mike, can you address the question, because about a change in policy? And actually, this is the time, in my understanding, to have that conversation, because that absolutely is part of the education program, is what special ed programs will be in this building. So this is absolutely the right time to talk about that. But my understanding is those programs currently are consolidated. They just happen to be spread across 2 buildings. And so because the 2 buildings that we're consolidating into that Fort River Wildwood are where those are housed, that's actually not a policy change. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Kathy.
I just want to make a couple comments. One, you are seeing something we have not yet seen. So don't assume that we've had the same very clear description that Donna. So I'm not saying that we haven't seen it. It was posted on Friday, so it exists. So the school building committee is meeting on Fridays. We don't meet this Friday, but the Friday afterwards. So some of the questions you're raising tonight, including Donna was saying that you could look at the size of the classroom. You may need the classrooms, but the size of the classroom are questions that I think will be also raised at our committee when we look at that. And we've got a meeting on the 18th. Then we have another meeting on the 4th. And by the 4th, which is before your meeting, is when we are tentatively scheduled to see some cost numbers associated with these. So we can later talk about, rather than having everything have to be done twice, there may be a point where we can be seeing things at the same time, or, so just this request as the information starts to be generated. This really was quite amazing. I think that Danisco was able to get an education program, a written one, before you, with the amount of time they've had. So this, we asked them, I think Peter asked them to move as fast as quick as they could the first time we met, and they are being true to that. So I think, there is some time to look at these numbers, but we'll have time later, is what Donna was saying as well. And that's the question of how often are each room used? Are they used maximum? Do we have any flexibility here? I don't have any answers because we haven't asked the questions. So I just wanted to say that we haven't gone through it the way you're going through it tonight yet.
I also want to ask a clarifying question in terms of roles and responsibilities. As the school committee votes on the education program, but not on some of the questions, about, where do we, how much square footage do we need to deliver that education program? Is that a school committee decision? I guess, I've never been through one of these processes before. Obviously, voting on the education program, we want to have sort of that knowledge of understanding how big of a school are we asking for with the program that we're designing. But some of the things that you were just talking about where we could shave here or there, that's not something that would be appropriately at the building committee. No, okay. But
If I may, yeah, so MSBA.
Before you answer, you talked about like some materials that were the space summary. Would those answer some of the questions that Jennifer was asking?
Perhaps, yeah, and I'm happy either tonight. I'm available if you would like us to come back in a couple of weeks, to after you've had a little more time to digest it, think about it. I'm happy to come back again to answer any more questions. This is, aside from cost, but this is one of the biggest decisions you're going to make on this on this new school. And I don't want to put it on just the school committee, but this informs the overall size of the building. And so you don't want to right? You don't want to overbuild. You don't want the space, too much space. MSBA will make sure you don't have too much space. If you came back and you said you need 6 classrooms per grade, they would say, no, we're not going to participate in it. No. But everything that you've done, and throughout all of the work that we've done with MSBA and other communities, you are combing through this and making sure that you are as efficient as possible. But I'm happy, whatever works best for you, Ms. McDonald, I can go through line by line so people can understand the space implications of your programs. Happy to come back at another time after you've had a little more time to digest it. I know Dr. Morris and I, we were going to spend more time going through the program to see, can we shave a square foot here and a square foot there, but that's probably where we're going to come down to. So,
Irv.
when people start talking about classroom size and whether they're too large, et cetera, and I look at these classroom sizes and I think about K through fifth graders, and having been a classroom teacher of third, fourth, and fifth graders, when I look at the classroom size, and so, if someone says to me, I want to reduce that classroom size, I think that if you do that in a vacuum without understanding what's going to be going on in those classrooms, you make a grave error. And so what I am suggesting is that we got to bring some teachers in here and on this to have them make comments on the classroom, the size of the classroom, because they are the ones who have to be in that classroom with those kids. And as far as I'm concerned, when I looked at that classroom structure and in terms of how many kids in that classroom, to reduce that size to the minimum to save money, only if you reduce it to save money, then you're going to be increasing the amount of stresses and strains on the teacher and students in that classroom.
Peter?
Yeah, so, I mean, we could probably defer school committee discussion of what we want our timing and meetings to be for agenda planning, but, you know, like, I like having the next month in order to be able to dig down into the details and with all the other supporting space utilization documents you've provided. So that we can go into any level of detail we want there. So I appreciate all the resources there. And I guess, you know, my general sense from your comments, Don, and Dr. Morris, you know, feel free to jump in here too, is that, you know, when we look at the two lines here that have the biggest difference between the MSBA guideline for 575 and the Fort River and Wildwood column, so these two being the special ed line and the core academic line, it doesn't feel to me like, without a major change, or I should say a major reduction in our services, that is, you know, we cut teachers and increase class sizes at the core academic level, or we eliminate some special ed programs that we currently have, there's not a lot of large order of magnitude room for shaving off multiple thousands or tens of thousands of square feet from these numbers. And you know, that's why I feel it's important when we explain this to the community, when we socialize this to the community, to explain those nuances in the MSBA approval process, right? Where they say, okay, we're going to defer to DESE and then we'll approve your special ed stuff later. And no, we didn't put in things for ELL and Title I. And because again, you know, if you just looked at this without understanding that context, you know, you could question why those numbers are larger there. And so I'm happy to, like, you know, continue to explore this and have discussions, but I just don't want us to set up an expectation that, well, gee, if we all just creatively think enough and dig deep, you know, we'll find 15,000 square feet that's just sitting, like, that's not going to happen. Again, this is, maybe someone else reads the ed plan and sees massive largesse in there, or room for huge changes, but I just don't see where that's possible.
Mike, were you responding to that?
I'm happy to defer after after Ben. Excuse me,
Okay.
Ben speaks.
Ben.
No, so yeah, I was just kind of, I guess it kind of tags on to what Peter was saying, because I've been in my head actually trying to do exactly what he's saying in where would I shave, but like the thought occurs to me, between the two buildings that we're going to consolidate, the rooms that are designed to be classrooms total 48,000 square feet, right? And we're spilling out into, I'm not going to do the math in my head right now, but so we're kind of already reducing the amount of square footage we use for core academic classes in this model at the 36. So, like, I mean, I assume we could cut here and there, but then also looking at, like, this, it looks minimal when I'm looking at, like, you know, my side of town, you know, the custodial maintenance. I'm not seeing a ton of info about storage, and that's an issue. So yeah, I'm kind of with Peter on that like I don't see us cutting, based on what I'm seeing here. I don't see us being able to cut out 20,000 square feet. Just my little observation here. And what I've been obsessing over here this whole time.
Mike.
Just two pieces, and I don't want to belabor this. I know we've been this has been really helpful, and the dialogue, and thank you, Donna, for your work. I think another way to think about it, and I'm not saying that there isn't room to reduce perhaps in some way, but our current buildings, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, probably Donna, but they're roughly 80,000 square feet, 82, something like that. So we're going from 160 some odd thousand square feet to potentially somewhere in the 113 range. So we are already condensing. Now I know the organization of Fort River and Wildwood are not optimized, right? That's the nicest thing I can say about them. And I know, Quaco Farm gets bigger in this model. I get that, but we're going from 3 schools to 2 schools and a pretty significant reduction in square footage. And I wanted to note that. And I think in terms of the program pieces, this is really important information, not just for the building project, but I think if there are different perspectives, and there's no game to this, if there's different perspectives on what we should be doing on these areas, whether it's special ed or Title I or ELL or class size, like I really need to know that now, right? Not literally now, but in the next month, because that'll actually inform our programming, not when the building's here, but if there's perceptions or feelings from the committee that we're overdoing it in some areas or instrumental music or whatever, then that's important information for me to hear, because we wouldn't wait for a building project to occur if there's a perception that we're over programming for our elementary school kids. And so I just want to note that, yes, it's part of a building project, but it's actually a nice opportunity to talk about whether we want to maintain the level of programming we have, or is it the right programming? Should we be doing different programming? So I think, one of the nice things is it is an opportunity for the committee to look into, what's a 30 some odd page vision document of what we do now, what we aspire to do, and to offer feedback. No, we want X, not Y, or we don't want X and Y. We feel like we need to not have that. We feel like it's more than what the community can offer, or more than what we can handle as an organization. We'll talk about 6th grades and middle school in a couple of minutes, and I'll talk about, where our capacity is on a number of these initiatives. It's a real challenge. So that's a very legitimate opinion, but I do want to make sure the committee feels very open to be able to share, their perspectives, because it's going to inform, it gives me feedback. We're talking about budget in a little bit later too, about where the priorities of the committee are, because all these things have budgetary implications over time. And the last thing I want to say is I don't want anyone to misread the comment about having one art room and using the STE room as a second, that there's only one art teacher, right? So I know someone could logically say, oh, well, that means, and that's not where we're going at all. It's that there's 2 rooms for art. One is more traditional art room. One is more of a project room, and the same for the music piece. So I just want to be, got some feedback already that someone maybe came to that conclusion, and it's not an accurate conclusion to come to, and just wanted to clarify that piece, but I'll stop.
So I'm feeling like it would be worthwhile, since we've spent almost 2 hours on this, that we talk about when we get to agenda planning, when we get to agenda planning, that we talk about adding another meeting in before our vote on the 8th. So if we assume that we're doing that, Jennifer, I see your hand up, but if it's something that has to be asked tonight, or if that we're going to be meeting, adding back that meeting, if we can move on to our next topic. Is it?
May I speak in favor of that?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like this group to have the opportunity to look at the detailed spreadsheet that feeds into this 36,000 and 12,000. That feeds into those numbers as a group, and have Donna here and Mike, obviously, and to sort of walk through each of the elements, so that we do have a better understanding of what those are big numbers, so that we do have a better understanding of what feeds into them as a group. Thank you.
Great. And I think, building off of your comments, Mike, too, I think, because we've jumped straight to the nitty-gritty details on space and sort of skipped over a little bit, or glossed over a little bit, some, just our core academic, educational programming, and what do we believe, and what do we, so I think we should, I'd like to see us spend a little bit of that time at that next meeting, really talking first about that and what are our priorities, then digging into well, how much space it is, the as you just described it, Jennifer, like going through like line by line and seeing what is that, if that's what we want, what does it look like, and then deciding if we feel like what we're wanting is too much. But we haven't had, I don't feel like we've had that conversation tonight, at least not very deeply. So thank you, Donna and Kathy, for joining us tonight and answering all of our questions. And I'll be in touch afterward about scheduling once we've nailed our date for that other meeting.
Perfect.
We'll circle back.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Do we? I can't read minds, but I'm going to guess that that Jennifer, you were going to ask for a break, and I was wondering if we wanted to, just because that was a big conversation. And then, but before we do, I see that Doug's joined us, and probably for the budget, and I'm just wondering, since we've got the next topic is probably also meaty, if folks would be okay if we swap the agenda. It would take 5 minutes, but then move ahead with item E, the budget presentation. Mike?
I was going to suggest, and we could talk about it after the break, that we maybe come back from the break and talk about, if we're planning another meeting in 2 weeks, what do we do tonight, and what topics perhaps do we push for 2 weeks? Because I'm conscious. Some of us been early. We had a little bit of a, icy morning. So I will admit to my fatigue setting in, not because the conversation wasn't good and I want to be more present, but I know I've heard from a couple committee members just about length of meetings as a concern. Just the quality of dialogue goes down. And so if we are going to schedule another meeting, maybe we can come back and brainstorm budget definitely needs to happen tonight. Don't worry, Doug. But some other things may be able to be pushed for 2 weeks without having major implications.
Yeah.
So we can do that when we come back from break. I don't want to take away from Jennifer or your suggestion, but
that sounds good. So it's 8:17 on my computer right now. So we'll come back at 8:22, and please be prompt because we'll start as soon as we have a quorum. Okay, thanks for coming back on time. So we'll, what I'm going to suggest that we do is we start with item E, the budget fiscal FY23 budget presentation. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied. And then go from there to the school choice hearing and the health and safety updates, and then close out with some of those housekeeping procedural topics, and then push items B, F, G, and H to the 22nd, to a future meeting, assuming the 22nd, but we'll circle back. Is that good with folks? Okay. So we will move on to the budget presentation.
Yep. And so while Doug's queuing up his presentation, I just want to start by reorienting folks, especially I think this time of year is really hard for the committee members because you're in different places and different budgets. In general, since the charter change, the Amherst budget happens slightly later than the regional budget. And so this is the first round budget at Amherst. You're not going to see the level of detail, for instance, that you'll see in a different district later this week, because the budget process isn't as far along as it is at the regional level. So sometimes the color schemes look the same, the slide deck, the template, it looks similar, the numbers are different, it's a different district. So I just want to orient you that the budget hearing would occur next month, and that's where we have a lot more detailed information about the specifics on the budget. So this is the broad overview presentation. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Slaughter. I just want to do a little orienting because it can be disorienting for all of us, including Doug and myself, to be back and forth between, in our case, 3 budgets, depending on the moment of the day or the day of the week. And we live this. And so for the committee members, I think it is particularly challenging. Doug.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for that orientation to sort of get people's minds wrapped around this a little bit. So I'll take you through the budget process, just talking about that. We're in the middle of it, quite frankly, in this series of dots. We're in the various meetings with school-based personnel and other groups. You guys fall as get classified as an other group in this slide. But the idea is we're going to set the frame, given the conversation we've had to date with internal staff projections we've made about our expected needs, and we're building from a level services, so trying to basically mimic what we have in place at the present time and carrying that forward, and knowing the sort of identified cost increases or changes that we know about. And we'll do a lot more of that refinement over the next few weeks as we go along and as we get to that budget hearing. Specifically to the timeline that the superintendent referenced, short story is you have to get the budget approved by April 1st. So we'll have to have a hearing, and that'll probably happen. It will happen in March. But then the formal budget needs to get to the town manager by April 1st, and he has to have it submitted to the town council for May 1st, so that they have time to review it and vote their budget for the town as a whole by June. So now to get into the nitty gritty of what's going on with our Amherst budget for this coming year. Can everyone see that, or should I make it a little larger? Is it okay? Kind of head nods. Okay. Just a few things to keep in mind. We got the guidance from the town relative to the available resources to us. It's about $665,000 more than last year. It's basically a 2.73%. The town as a whole for their departments went up 2.5%. Ours is a little higher by virtue of a conversation. Well, not a conversation. The way in which we account for charter and choice out tuitions and reimbursements. And so that's why it's a little higher than 2%. What that basically says is the reimbursement we received a couple years ago was a little higher, and therefore there's a little more of that available to the schools for this coming year. When it's the reverse of that, we get less. So like last year, we got a little less than the 2.5 that was in every other department. So that's why 2.73. In preparing this, the assumptions that we're making is to utilize about $750,000 of school choice revenue to help support the budget. We traditionally do that by reducing our expenses in regular ed classroom teaching staff costs. That's a little higher than we typically use, but we've saved in school choice the last couple of years, and so we've got it available to us for utilization this year, and we'll still have a healthy balance in our school choice revenue fund. So we get circuit breaker, which is for extraordinarily high expense special education students. The state has a mechanism to provide some additional support to the students, and so we're utilizing that circuit breaker funding in the order of $346,000. That helps again reduce our expenses. That'll be more in the expense section of the budget. It shows up, but it doesn't show up. It sort of doesn't show up as an expense because we've applied this revenue to it. With the strategic partnership that the town of Amherst has with the University of Massachusetts, the district's been receiving about $170,000 for the last couple of years, more explicitly put into payroll lines this year. In the past, we've kind of held it in control accounts. That's a change that I made to sort of make it more explicit in the budget where we're utilizing the funds. So that's, and when we see the next slide, you'll understand why it's important that I point that out, as well as the school choice revenue, because it will have some unusual and counterintuitive type things that come into play there. And we have continuing support from the federal government relative to COVID-related expenses, and so we have ESSER grants in particular that are remaining for us that are supporting our budgets in some ways, and may be necessary to support our overall budget. And you'll see that for the last bullet point. On the expense side, we've taken and projected steps and a cost of living increase. Just because we're in current negotiations with our unions. Actually, it's 5 of 6 contracts. There's one of those that may soon be ratified, so it may be 4 of 6 when before too long. But nonetheless, we've made projections to what we think we're going to need to meet the requirements of those negotiations, and that's in our budget. Health insurance are up just below 4%. That number was we had estimated 4% earlier in the year, and then we were confirmed with that. It's I think technically 3.8, but the difference between 3.8 and 4 is very small. And so our regular instruction expenses, and we'll see this on the next slide, we made a programmatic shift in some of how we're delivering ELL, and so the expense line is less, and it's taken up into the payroll lines because of how we've modified how we're delivering that. We're not doing any less with those students. We're not supporting them any less way, but it's just a difference in how they're shown in the budget and how we're technically executing that program work in our schools. And then we have some contracted services expenses that we used to have in support services section of the budget. We now moved it in special education because that is really the nature of the work that's getting done, and so it more precisely targets where it is. As I note there, central administration is going to show a fairly decent increase. It's about sort of having the budget reflect where our actual spending has been over the last couple of years relative to legal expenses. They've gone up. There's been we've had a lot of negotiations with regard to COVID and coming to agreements and MOUs with our unions around that, but also just the general uptick in legal needs. Not a necessarily bad thing. It's just the nature of the environment we're in and the circumstances. I think that would be true at any district around around the Commonwealth and around the country, that they're seeing that area of their budget a little higher than it has been. But what the sort of takeaway here is that relative to what we know of revenues and what we know of expenses, there's about $394,000 that will need either reductions, and we'll find some of those. We're still in the process of looking for those kind of things, or other kinds of revenue that may need to support our budget as we go ahead. And so to show you the sort of detail of what that looks like is here. And now I am going to zoom in because that's decidedly too small. And so hopefully that gets us a little bit bigger. I think the thing I'll point out, you'll notice in the like regular instruction, it looks like we've had a drop. We haven't lost a bunch of people or something like that. That's really an artifact of using a higher level of school choice and also applying that strategic partnership money from UMass. That's really the big driver in lowering that cost from one year to the next. The number of people that we're projecting and the cost of those folks is and their steps is included in there. And you see in some other areas the budget sort of more typical increases that you would see in payroll. Likewise, when you look at this instructional, regular instruction line, that drop of a little over $18,000 is really that programmatic shift I mentioned before. The support services shifting, of budget from support services to special education is again that sort of dynamic that we're seeing from that previous page played out in the actual numbers here. And so most of the rest of the increases that we see, I mentioned central administration, things like transportation, food services, et cetera, are the typical kinds of increases from sort of inflationary pressures, contracted services that we have. So our transportation contract is bound to a consumer price index, and so that pushes a certain amount of increase to that line. And I would say in our contingencies is part of where we carry some of that projection for negotiations. Some of it's held within, some of the estimating is held within our payroll accounts up above, and then some of it's held in that contingencies or control accounts as we call them. And so we've tried to anticipate what we think is within the bounds or some reasonable amount of increase for folks, and at the same time also responsive to the limitations we have from a funding standpoint. And even with that, our overall budget increased about 4.3%, and that's, like as I said earlier, just shy of $400,000 more than kind of resources available. So we're going to be looking for some economies and efficiencies that we're in the process of reviewing, known adjustments that we can make relative to either enrollment changes or certain planned aspects of our budget that we know won't materialize. Example that comes up kind of often that I think we're likely to have as a reduction in our expenses, sabbaticals. I don't think we've had any requests for sabbaticals. We'll confirm that and show that savings in our continued movement through the budget. And so I think that, there's still a lot of work to do and a lot of evaluating and review of programs and offerings and services and expenses and refinement we're going to continue to do. But this gives you a frame of where we sit right now relative to what we think our resources are and what we think our expenses are looking like in the coming year. And so I think with that, I will stop and see if you have any questions. I'll leave this on screen, and if let's see if I can make it just a smidge bigger and still have it kind of fit. So I think I'll stop there and let you guys ask any questions that you have after reviewing this. I think in the packet that was attached, you probably got the larger budget book, which has a lot more of the nitty-gritty line by line kind of detail. This is sort of a summary that's in there as well, but is kind of the easier to look at in a glance. But I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
I've now learned to open up the queue so I can, because Google helpfully tells me who raised their hand first. So, Peter.
Yeah, thank you for this, Doug, as always. So I guess the first thing I'll say is what I said at the other committee. Just for the record, I'm not inclined to cut level services in the budget that we ultimately approve and send to the town council. So, but 394K. I'm hopeful that we'll find efficiencies, so to speak. I'm not 100% optimistic we're going to get all the way down to a point where we could get a level services budget within the guidance provided by the town, and so that's a crossroads that the school committee is going to have to decide how to deal with collectively once we have the final numbers of this budget. So so that being said, so this general idea of possibly using one-time funds to carry us over until a near future years when we can greater realize some cost efficiencies, and this relates to the 6th grade move and also the hopeful fingers crossed new building. What line items? So my two questions on that are: what line items do you think that will most affect in terms of reducing the cost? And And I'll ask you an impossible question. Like, how much money are we talking here? Like, what order of magnitude can we ballpark be thinking about what these efficiencies are? I know that's probably a really unfair question, that there's a dramatic range based on how those things evolve, but it is the kind of thing we have to be thinking about if we're going to, endorse a decision to potentially use some one-time money to cover recurring expenses, which typically is not, the best idea.
I'll suggest a couple of things, and hopefully maybe the superintendent will suggest a few more. I think he's probably thought of some of these a little bit more than I have, because he's more often thinking longer term because of the nature of his job. So not that I don't think long term, I just more recently it's sort of day to day and year to year, and I think he's thinking in a more perspective way for the future. But I think there's going to be some savings potentially in the number of staff we have. There are some efficiencies when you put more of the kids in more of the same grade level in a building. You're going to not need as many sections because you just have an efficiency that way. You potentially gain some efficiency staffing wise with regard to your special education programming and that sort of thing. Transportation's potentially less because you're going to one less building. So you might get an efficiency in some of the route running that we do, so that we're only going to 2 buildings instead of 3. With the 6th grade move to the middle school, again, those same kind of economies of staffing and efficiencies of staffing and leveraging people that can straddle between middle school students and 6th grade students, that can create some efficiencies, will provide some relief in the budget. So those are the ones I can think of right off the top of my head. Size-wise, order of magnitude, I'm a little hesitant to guess at this moment, but it's not a small number. The thing you think about is if you have one fewer teacher, I mean, we estimate a teacher's salary at Master's Step 9, which is around $65,000. That's a broad ballpark sort of number. You have associated costs that go with that if they take health insurance or those kind of things. And so if the economy of staffing is 3 or 4 or 5 people, that starts to become real money real quick. So I think I'll kind of stop there and not sort of commit to anything much more concrete than that, and see if the superintendent might have additional comments or thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. We have to bridge to the 2 kind of big precipitating events or big events coming in the future. I mean, the building project in particular will have, we anticipate significant operational costs. I mentioned before, we're tens of thousands of less spaces to heat. We'll have more efficiency in how they're done. So there's operational savings that way. There's some other operational efficiencies that'll come with having 2 buildings instead of 3. Less itinerant staff. There's a lot of I believe savings that'll come. So it's how do we bridge from where we are now to those points in the future? The short story is, I think it's a six-digit number, Peter. I'm not at a place to say how big that is within that, but it's not around the edges. I think if we're going to bridge to get there, given the fiscal situation that we're in, given just standard increases and that come year to year, I think we're going to be challenged to do not use in the next 2 years, actually, which is our when ESSER funds sunset funds. The challenge is that creates an operational deficit, right? That we're using funds that aren't long term, but we do have 2 events coming in the future that we do believe will make our system more sustainable, and reduce some operational load. So that's as far as we are. When we come back a month from now, we'll have a lot more details on that. But I didn't want to not give at least the order of magnitude number or number of digits anyway to respond to that question, because I think it's spot on.
Thank you.
So Irv took your hand down, but if you
No, I didn't take it down. It went down for me.
Okay, Irv.
If you leave it up too long, it gets tired and it goes down on its own. So, Doug, thank you for this. There are a couple questions. Would you inform us about the contents of the control accounts is control. Well, the question is, where is surplus and deficiency in this? So I don't see it. That's A. And B, if there, if I'm assuming there's a surplus, has there been any discussion about using some of that surplus to look at or take care of some of this $300,000 plus dollars? That's the first question in terms of that. Second is, if we were to use temporary money, the ESSER funds or whatever, where would we use it? And if we're going to use, if we did use it, where could we use it so that in the future would have less of an impact on a going forward basis? But I think those two things I would like for you to speak to.
Sure. So on the first question about sort of excess and deficiency, unfortunately in the elementary school we don't have that. So the town has their reserves, but they don't. At the school level, we don't have a similar thing. So when we come in under budget at the end of a fiscal year, that money returns to the town and goes into their reserves, and hopefully they give it to us for a subsequent year. So it's not really a line like that. I think so relative to the contingency line here in particular, there's sort of two factors involved with why that increased so much from the current year to next year. One is that the money available from UMass from the strategic partnership agreement, it had been budgeted in that line. It budgets because it's sort of revenue. It budgets as a negative number on an expense chart like this, so it makes the contingency number much lower much higher than it would have been. And then additionally, among other contingencies that we have, the biggest impact there is our projection for needs relative to the cost of living and other items negotiated with our unions in the union contract. So that's what's sort of sitting there is some estimates of what we think we need to meet our contract obligations. And so if we settle when we settle our contracts, that contingency line item will shrink considerably, and those funds that we put in that area will go up into the payroll accounts to balance out those different accounts and cover those costs. I think from the standpoint of the sort of one-time money, I think what we're looking for as far as application to minimize its impact when it's not available to us anymore is we're looking at those kinds of things that we think will be not needed as much when we get to that 6th grade in the middle school and a new building coming online. So what are all those areas we kind of thought we might have savings are going to be areas where that support is going to be used in the short term. And so then when it goes away, we can reduce those budgets because our utility bills will be lower or our transportation costs will be less. And so it'll probably be spread out amongst all those different areas, much like the items we kind of ticked off as potential areas of savings in the future. But the key thing for us is that when we, if we're utilizing one-time money, is that we're using a number that we think is smaller than we think that our savings will be when we get to the other end of this transition to these new facilities and new locations, and so that the impact is held, sort of net zero on the end of that time horizon. So I think as we articulate and think about our use of one-time money, we're also thinking about we're going to be as conservative and use as little of that as we can because we're trying to foresee and project what we think the savings in the future are going to be and where those savings are going to be, and try not to exceed the value of that.
But Doug, if we are looking at $300,000+ beyond what we're expected to be, obviously questions will be raised as, hey, why aren't you using that money to reduce that? I mean, the town council, the town manager would be, well within their rights to ask that question, and it would be a logical question.
Irv, I'm just going to sorry for interrupting, but and unless that was a follow-up, Jennifer has her hand up, and so I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask one question before we go around and get it set.
But yeah, it was a follow-up because I had said that I had, anyway, it was a follow-up. And that's, it's a logical question, and whether he answers it now or later doesn't make any difference to me, but it has to be answered.
Yeah, I think what I'll say is, yeah, we're going to be in ongoing conversations with the town as far as, the ways in which they view savings in the future, and we have to negotiate, what it's going to take, and what and how the sixth grade program works in the middle school. That'll be the first one we do, and that's going to happen over the next year. So we'll start to articulate what sort of increases and decreases and efficiencies are coming there, and that'll frame more precisely sort of what economies we can get, and I think we'll do the same as the building project moves along. So I think it's part of the planning and process, and we're still in it. And so I think that we'll continue to try to refine that and articulate more precisely that as we go along. Hope that helps at least a little bit, but I know it's vague. I don't mean to be vague. And
very vague, Doug. Very.
It
vague.
is. It's we haven't run precise numbers on some of that, and some of it will depend. Some of the things will depend upon some outcomes of stuff we're figuring out right now. So we're just starting to have meetings around the planning and programming around sixth grade moving to the middle school, and so that'll as that progresses and we understand that and shape that more formally, then we'll have a much more precise sense of what that saves and what that costs. And I think the same's true with the building as choices get made about the physical structure and what it can or cannot do, and we get more precise with what kinds of operational needs it's going to have. We'll start to be more able to be more precise about what savings we're going to start to see. And so we're still in process. So we're pretty vague right now. Sorry about that, but I think we're going to keep chipping away at those numbers and trying to get that framed a little bit as we go along.
Jennifer.
Doug, does this budget maintain the cuts in specials teachers that was instituted for this current year?
It does. So with the level services, we take what we have on sort of on the ground at the time we take the snapshot, which is kind of late November, I think, was when we sort of snapshot our personnel. So yeah, that retains that level of staffing for in all areas. I mean, not just in our specials, but across all the other departments as well.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Can we hear about how that went, or how that worked, or I know what the idea was in principle, but how did that actually work in practice? The cuts to the specialist teachers and having just the creative idea that was come up with for this current year. Like, did that result in the savings that we had anticipated?
I would suggest, on a purely financial standpoint, yes. We have fewer FTE in those areas, and so yeah, we definitely are seeing savings as a result of that, and I think we're on track budget wise relative to that choice. I think as far as any comment relative to the educational piece, I'm going to have to defer. That's not what I'm going to know the answer to, but as far as just the financial piece, yes, it's performing as expected.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, in practice, like on the ground in schools, did it work? Like, how did it go?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on that one, Doug. I think it's been very challenging. So I want to acknowledge that for staff members who were transitioning to teach kids in other buildings, that's been a challenge. As I said last year, it's going to reduce the level of arts integration that is possible. Our students receiving daily high quality arts instruction every day. 40 minutes a week, the way they had in the past. Yeah. But it has other negative implications that definitely have impacted our specials staff members and some of the opportunities. So, I think everything that was predicted in terms of specials has gone on. I think students are getting a high quality experience, but some of those other unscheduled, and by unscheduled, not on the special schedule, times have not been realized in the same way. And I want to acknowledge it's been very challenging for staff as well. So that'd be my elevator response to, obviously we could talk more about that, but in the context of an initial budget presentation, I think that's probably the right amount of detail.
Doug, I apologize if you've already spoken to this, but if in another budget that we've looked at recently, there was some of the payroll was supported by grants that wouldn't show up on this look at the sort of general fund appropriation, and I'm just wondering if that's similar approaches happening in this budget too.
Yes, is the very short answer, but yes, that's true, and you can see some of that in the fuller budget book that's in, and attached to the agenda. There's a grant section that articulates some of that. I would suggest that probably not even all of that is. I mean, that's accurate as of its creation, but there is some more that we're looking at. I mean, I think the response to the pandemic and the needs that kids have presented, and our approach to finding staff and to help address those needs is an ongoing and ever-changing kind of thing. And so we're definitely using grant funds to do that. And we always use grant funds. There are other kinds of funding around. Title I is a supporter of staffing, and IDEA, which supports special education in particular. So all of those are in the mix and do to provide additional support to our budget. At times with grants, they're what they call non-supplanting, which means they are in addition to, they can't take away from the regular. But there are some grants that do allow for us to support directly and augment our operational budget in a more direct way. Most grants have specific requirements and needs, and they set in some way sort of separate from our sort of base budgeting. But there are a few grants that allow us to sort of support our budget in a more direct way.
Irv?
One of the things, and Peter said it earlier, and other members have said it, but I've said it a number of times, both here and in other public settings, that I would resist any kind of budget cuts, and I do resist them. Those budget cuts. I'm highly suspect of budget cuts coming. However, when I say that, and I really sincerely mean it, I want to make sure that we here, the school committee and the school administration, have applied all available funds that we have to reduce that number, and that we've done it judiciously. Because I want to know that when I say that hey, we have done that, and then and because I'm going to stand my ground on that. But I don't want to be standing on ground that I can't support.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think as we continue to work through the budget and look for we'll certainly look for efficiencies and adjustments to our budget to reduce those expenses so as to be closer to our revenue number. And I think that as we go forward, we're going to be trying to strike that balance and do everything we can to not make changes that are detrimental to the educational outcomes that we're seeking.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is that, hey, look, if there are one-time funds that can be used to reduce that, and it is not going to really severely hurt us in the foreseeable future that we can see, then those funds should be applied.
I'm going to keep us moving. Peter has a question, and I think we're going to have to make a motion in just a couple of minutes because we're running out of time. But Peter, did you have your hand up?
You're like psychic tonight with the breaks and the. I move to extend our meeting by 30 minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Moved by Demling, seconded by Shao. Take a roll call vote. I'm just going on order of my screen. Jennifer?
Aye. Yes, aye.
Ben? Peter?
Peter, I.
Irv?
Yeah.
And Allison, I. Okay, so we will extend to 30 minutes.
So if I may.
Yes, please.
I'll just say in response to Mr. Rhodes, absolutely. Well, if as much as in a general sense, using one-time money to support your budget's a tricky thing to do. It again, I think as we think about sort of future planning, that's part and parcel of it, is to use some one-time money if potentially we can have some savings when we realize those other couple of things that are coming up in the short, in the fairly near term.
Peter?
Now I remember what I was going to say. So I'm glad you brought that up because, it may be that we get bailed out, right? And that we kick this can down the road and it comes to pass that we can pass a level services budget that, given efficiencies and some one-time money, we don't have to exceed the town's guidance. And that would be good, for school committee to town government relations. We've not, I don't think, ever exceeded the guidance. But it's, it's one thing, to say tonight, we're not going to cut services. We're not going to cut like actual student services. It's another thing to like vote a budget that goes above the guidance, right? And that would be a different kettle of fish. And I'm not saying I would like to avoid it if possible, obviously, which is, why I appreciate Irv's comment. But it's something I struggle with what we would do if we got there, because I don't want to go down a road where we're not in, as optimal collaboration as possible with the source that funds our schools locally, with our town government. It's best for our schools long term. So we have a lot of work to do. Often the health insurance percentage bails us out. It doesn't look like it's going to happen this time. We'll see what happens with the state budget, because sometimes that can change a little bit after the governor's. But I mentioned it before, but I thought I'd bookend it here.
Unless anybody has a new question or topic, I'm going to try to keep us moving. Is there any closing new questions? Being none. Okay.
Thank you.
And I trust, as always, that Doug and Mike are available for individual questions after the fact if need be.
Absolutely.
Okay. Before we move on to the next item, I just want, in reading our minutes, we talked at our last meeting about the possibility of doing, having an input form for the community, and given Jennifer and I met, talked briefly about this, and given sort of the direction that another school committee was making, we decided we decided to do the same as that school committee, and not move forward with the form and take this up maybe much earlier in the process in the future. Next, we were going to do our school choice hearing, and I'll turn that to you, Mike, to kick that off.
Yep. Very briefly, Amherst for many years has been a school choice district. We take a pretty limited number of school choice students. In the past couple of years, we've limited it to kindergarten, and occasionally we have a grade level where we have, enrollment shift and we take a couple students, but it's primarily limited to kindergarten. The school choice students add a lot to our district in many, many ways. It also helps support the district's finances. We don't add school choice students to add sections. We fill seats that would otherwise be empty. So it's a net significant increase to our district coffers. There has been times in the past where some committee members have had philosophical objections about choice. So I want to offer a balanced perspective. That said, this is an opportunity for members of the public, if they would like to weigh in. The committee will vote. I would suppose probably March 8th would be the logical date, and not push it till 2 weeks from now, but that's up to the chair to vote on whether to continue being a school choice district or not. And it is a public hearing, so sort of whenever the chair and the committee are ready, we can open it up. And if there's anyone who's watching who would like to make a comment or advocate one way or the other on the Amherst Public Schools continuing being a school choice district, they're welcome to do so.
And before we open the floor, I just want to make sure that there aren't any questions from the committee on this. Seeing none. Okay. Tony Cunningham, you have your hand raised. You unmute yourself, and folks will have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, I'm having phone problems. This is Tony Cunningham, Owen Drive. I fully agree with Dr. Morris's statements about school choice families adding a lot to the district. The one question I had is the MSBA and the NSDEC projections for enrollment in 2026 and beyond. Do they include school choice or not? And so what I'm thinking about is in 2026, when a school opens and we're planning a school for 575 students, if we were to take kindergarten or first grade in this fall into school choice, I imagine they would be in 4th or 5th grade when the school opens. I'm just wondering how that might impact enrollment, or would the numbers be so small as to be insignificant? Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Given that it's a hearing, is it okay to answer that question? It's not public comment, it's,
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah. So, and I think it's a good one for the committee to hear the response on. The numbers are pretty small, is the answer. The last thing that Ms. Cunningham said, or Tony, for extending our first name basis to guests as well, is pretty small. So, if we look at the NSDEC enrollments in particular, as well as the MSBA, but, when I look at the number of students they're projecting per grade level versus the number of students that the census would predict or NSDEC predicts, there is room for, a modest amount of school choice students. So it is something we absolutely take a look at because we are planning ahead for that eventuality. But based on this year's numbers, for instance, we were able to open school choice numbers, school choice seats, and we're still well under actually the projections of what we would need to be. We didn't, try to overfill our classes now to get there. If we do see a larger than average kindergarten enrollment, we will have to limit or, not take school choice students because we're very conscious of not overfilling our classes and then having a problem down the road with the building project and the enrollment. So it is on our minds. The numbers are pretty modest, and to date, they've only supported our enrollment needs and supported our district. But it's a great point and something we definitely keep in mind.
Thank you. Are there other comments from the public in the room? I'm not seeing any. Last chance. Okay. As Dr. Moore said, when we get to agenda planning, we'll look at what date we have that scheduled. I believe right now it's scheduled for March 8th. Next up is our health and safety update, item C on the agenda. And I assume that's you, Dr. Morse.
It is.
Mike.
And thank you. And again, I'll be brief on this one as well. I know it's getting late. So just want to share an update across our 3 districts. Our staff vaccination rate, which we have confirmed based on your policy, is 94%. So that's, really want to thank our staff. It's a very, very high vaccination rate, particularly for districts that don't have an exemption process in terms of medical or religious, but simply allow for testing and different kind of mask and alternate arrangements. So really appreciate our staff. It's certainly contributing to our school safety. And I'm really glad to say our numbers have dropped significantly from a couple weeks ago. I think the same trends we're seeing statewide, we're certainly seeing in our locality. And, we were used to seeing multiple positives a day at each site. And, today, for instance, I think there was only 1 of the 3 schools that had any positives at all. And that's getting to be normalized here. So we are sort of returning to our kind of mid to late fall experience as it relates to positive cases. So really, really pleased about that. Thankful to the town health department as well as building principals. We offered additional school-based, during the school day, site-based vaccine clinics for students. So in the last week and a half, we had 25 new students vaccinated or received their first shot, I should say. And the town will be back a couple weeks from now, at each site. And so students come, they do it in the medical waiting room, town staff's there, and it's very controlled and normalized. It's much less, lower number of students than the other ones, so it can just be done in the flow of the school day, and it's been much appreciated by families. So I want to thank the town health department. They continue to stay at it and support, and there's still continues to be demand, which is great. I mean, hearing them, they like doing boosters, of course, and they're offering boosters at the second shot clinics that are coming up for staff. So when they're doing that for students, if staff haven't gotten a booster, they're going to offer that. But we really, love first shots, because that's really the needle that has slowed significantly locally and across the state and across the country. So we're really glad that we're meeting demand and making it convenient for families. Pool testing also similarly, we're having a number, yesterday's pool test was Wildwood. There was 63 pools or something. There was 0 positives. And so we're continuing to see consistently strong numbers coming out of our schools, and that feels really good compared to where we were talking about a month ago. So again, our safety measures, people's, all those measures are making a huge difference. We've given out or are giving out rapid tests, to students, and that's on an every other week basis. Same with staff members on an every other week basis. So it's 2 tests in 1 box, so that there's an additional testing opportunity for all students and all staff members, in addition to pool testing. So many staff members have contributed to that, but our interest has been high. Again, significantly over half of our population opting to participate in that. We've also given out a fair number of rapid tests for families or staff members who have someone test positive. So we had a family today, for instance, there was someone who tested positive in their family. It's a rather large family, so we gave out 4 boxes because that's what they needed, and that's a service that we're dedicated to continuing to provide for our staff and families, because we know that spread is happening significantly within the family context. We know that then in fact influences the safety of our school, and we've been using our supply of tests to be able to support our folks with that. The town still has a mask mandate, and I'm in constant contact with the town health director. I would note that my phone's going off because apparently the governor has made a notice of a, let's see, the governor will be with the lieutenant governor, secretary of education, and commissioner of elementary and secondary education for a COVID-19 announcement tomorrow at 10:30. I've not been notified in any formal way except via text by friendly neighbors in Amherst, so to speak, who perhaps follow the governor's press briefings closer than I do. I don't want to speculate, but I can't help but notice that many other states like New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware recently announced that they were ending in some different dates, but sometime in the next month, their mandatory school-based mask mandates. So certainly the speculation among superintendents is growing. Not excited speculation, I'm saying. There's no, I won't share an emotional response to that, but speculation nonetheless. So certainly if that happens, I would anticipate, much like those states, that it then pushes the decision down at a local level. I do not anticipate certain states further away from here that prevented local mask mandates from being in place. So all that to say, more information in the ever-changing situation, I'll be sure to share with the community as well as the committee anything I learned, but I've not received any formal emails, communication from DESE or anyone else about such meeting at this meeting tomorrow, nor what the contents are. But it does seem like things in the Northeast are trying to trend in that direction a bit. And so it would not surprise me for some discussion of school mask mandate coming in the state. And I believe that is it. Well, maybe I want to put a finer point on that last one. No matter what the governor suggests tomorrow, I find it highly unlikely that there would be a direct impact on our local district anytime immediately. So I don't want people to misinterpret my last comments and assume that the governor is going to say something tomorrow and by noon, no one's going to have a mask on in schools, right? That is not what I'm suggesting. There may be a statewide decision that pushes a statewide mandate to local districts to figure out what it wants to do with. So all that said, we'll see, we'll communicate, we'll let people know where we are, and what's being decided, and how to participate and share their feedback as we move forward, which I'm sure there will be plenty of. And I'll stop there and see if there are questions.
Questions? I think just on that last point, because we've heard from a few parents of kindergartners in the district about questioning the when are we going to remove the mask requirement in our elementary schools, and we haven't talked about that at this committee, but I do, we have a policy that says that that's in your discretion as the superintendent, following public health guidelines. And as you mentioned, the current public health guideline in the town of Amherst is an indoor mask requirement. So that is sort of what's governing us at this moment. And then if the town of Amherst lifts that, we also have the DESE guidance that right now is holding. So we have multiple layers right now that sort of, at this moment, to your point, we can't at tomorrow morning, all of a sudden remove our mask requirement. But I do think that there's interest in having that conversation of what does that look like. And one of the questions that, DESE talks about is that 80% threshold. Do we have an idea? You mentioned that we have 94% of staff that are vaccinated in our elementary schools. Do we have a notion, data on what proportion of our students are, at least in the kindergarten and above?
It's about 70%.
70, yeah.
Yeah. So there's more students than staff, certainly. Saying it because I'm late and tired. If I was a betting person, I don't think there'll be a lot of conversation about 80% in the near future.
Yeah.
I hope, well, I'm not going to say hope. I am happy to be proven wrong. But I think the way this is trending nationally and in the Northeast, including states, well, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but that I think that threshold, I'm not seeing it come out of other states. That's a fair, factual statement. Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions from the committee? No? Okay. So we're moving items B, F, G, H to the 22nd. We're going to jump to future agenda planning. So there was a request or suggestion, recommendation, I don't know what the right word is at this hour, to add back that the meeting on the 22nd. And I'm just going to do a head nodding scan on screen to see if folks want that. Yes, okay. So assuming, the 22nd, Tuesday, 6:30, we have school building update and ed plan discussion, 6th grade to the middle school update, charter costs discussion, meeting breaks discussion, and then I did attach the appointments sheet. We may not need to talk about that unless there's the question. So just briefly on that one, there's one item that that isn't clear. I think all the other appointments we've made, so we can push that if we choose to. If that meeting ends up running really late, then we may do that, because the one appointment that we haven't done, we have until probably late summer to be able to force that decision. Then our next meeting on the 8th, we have another health and safety update, budget hearing on the FY23 budget, school building committee updates, ESSER spending updates, our vote on school choice, and our vote on the ed plan. So that's a pretty big meeting. I'll think of talk to Mike, and in between, just think if there's ways that we can sort of shrink that meeting a little bit, moving things around. If okay, any Peter?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have any specific items. But since this issue of like, we have this queue of things we need to get to, we don't want to meet for 6 or 7 hours past midnight like some of our neighboring districts have. But then it becomes, okay, well, are we going to start meeting every week? And then, we're going to have two committee meetings a week, plus the subcommittees and whatever else you're doing. So I don't have a specific proposal, but I just wanted to put a bug in people's ear in terms of like, okay, which thing is it that we want to move, right? Do we want to have more meetings? Do we want to have longer meetings? Do we want to have shorter agendas? It's just something I think for all of us as a community to ponder, just because it seems to be coming up more often.
Agree. We'll add that to our list of items to discuss. Okay. Warrant report. I do have several of them are attached in the agenda, but not all of them. So I will start. Apologies, I lost it. We'll start with the most recent because that one's not attached. So I, Alice McDonald, authorized by my signature payables the amount of $146,825.95 for a warrant dated January 28th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $87,252.89, revolving fund expenses of $14,558.68, grant fund expenses of $5,431.83, ESSER funds of $39,489.13, and miscellaneous of $93.42. And I signed that on February. Oops, it just disappeared. February 3rd. I, Alice McDonald, authorized by my signature, payroll in the amount of $731,105.37 dated January 26, 2022, and I signed that on January 25th, 2022. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $173,828.49 for a warrant dated January 14th, 2022. This included general fund expenses of $121,464.01, revolving fund expenses of $15,353.94, grant fund expenses of $4,400.83, ESSER funds of $31,430.45, and gifts in the amount of $1,179.26. And I signed that on January 20th. And last, I, Alice McDonald, authorized by my signature payroll in the amount of $727,093.97, dated January 12th, 2022, and I signed that on January 11th, 2022. And that is all. We don't have gifts to accept. So I will move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Jennifer, and no discussion and roll call vote. Irv.
Aye.
Allison, aye. Ben.
Ben, aye.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, aye.
Peter.
Peter, aye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.